Sorry. We were doing so well. I got asked to talk a little bit about the big society, and it's really interesting because I think in some ways you could look at the big society and say, well, it's very transition-y, isn't it? And there are some things about it that are really interesting, I think, and there are some things about it that are really positive in terms of it creates for transition initiatives, particularly those of us who are doing transition initiatives in very conservative parts of the country, to all of a sudden have a common language where they can go, oh, you're in a big society, oh, I see, which has been really, really useful. But I think there are some things about it that I'm quite nervous about. I think, firstly, it has an assumption that business is always benign, and that as community organisations we should all be working alongside business because business's motivations are always entirely honourable. And also the idea that this is a time when we need smaller government and less powerful government is something really alarming, I think, in terms of dealing with climate change, which needs strong and principled leadership and strong local government. There's very little in terms of social justice woven into the idea of the big society. It was largely developed in isolation from all the other organisations working on that kind of level. But the key thing for me that it lacks is an underpinning narrative. Why would we do all this stuff? Why would we devolve power to local government? What's the reason for it other than just an ideological reason? So what I want to just do over for the next couple of minutes is just to give you a sense of maybe what we could do with that, what the big society could be. And it's around this idea of, are we talking about localism, which is what the big society is, about giving more power to local government? Or are we talking about localization, which is what transition's talking about, which is about building local economies, trying to meet local needs where we can with local produce, trying to make those kind of those loops much more closed. This is a picture of the Bristol and District Market Gardeners Association in 1896. This is when the city of Bristol was ringed with market gardens and full of market gardens. And if you read the history of it, it's fascinating how the market gardens followed where the horses were going in terms of development and stuff. But these guys, you might imagine people around the market gardens, it was all a bit Steptoe and Son and all a bit grotty. These guys were serious players in the economy at that time. For me, actually, what would it be like if the narrative of the big society was that in 4 years' time we want to have created 2,000 new urban market gardens across this country that are community-owned, and that we're training young people to work those gardens and to produce produce for their local community. This is the son of a guy who used to run a commercial market garden in the middle of Totnes, where I live, which is all now car parks, taking a group of people around and showing them where the things used to be and telling the stories about the things that happened when it was a working garden. And this idea of putting these things back, this is growing communities in Hackney, which has already got 3 new market gardens in place. But I think these kind of, if we can set targets around, we want new market gardens. We want to be training people up in food craft again, and to create community bakeries, all this kind of stuff. You know, creating a culture of entrepreneurship around food. Planting, maybe if we said we wanted to plant 1 million productive trees throughout the towns and cities of this country, like this is happening in one of the stations here in London. You know, if we set some really useful targets around urban agriculture and turning urban spaces into food production, these kind of things would make such a difference. If we were able to look at setting some targets around building affordable housing for people who currently are priced out of the market, but we say that we want those to use 90% of local materials, then the sourcing of those local materials creates all kinds of potential for enterprise and people setting up new businesses. You want to build a house with clay plasters today, you have to import them from Germany. You build an eco house with sheep's wool insulation, chances are that comes from Germany too. And actually we can be looking at creating a lot more livelihoods here. Retrofitting buildings, this is a friend of mine and myself, I'm taking a picture, but trying to insulate under the floor in my house, one of the most profoundly unpleasant things I've done in my whole life. But actually, there's an enormous job in this country of insulating and retrofitting buildings. You know, why don't we see the big society as the potential to train people up, give them the skills to do that, create their own livelihoods doing this kind of work. So just to wrap up, I want to, in my last minute, is to just give a sense of where this could all go and what we're trying to do in different initiatives around that. Because I think we can look at individual projects, but there's also a sense of of actually where this could go. So one of the things we've been doing is looking at the context of local food projects. This is a food mapping thing we did for the southwest of England, looking at all the settlements of over 800 people and starting to look at how all the different things all kind of dovetail in together. That you're not talking about food self-sufficiency, but resilience is a different thing when it comes to food. Transition Streets is a big project that we've been doing in Totnes, which has now got, as I said, about 60 households involved. That's about 5% of all the people looking at doing this carbon reduction. PV on the hall in the town, but all kinds of other things starting to spin off of that. And actually the idea that we maybe put resources in the hands of the community to manage its own development is really important. Setting up your own energy companies, this is another thing. It's another loop we can close, that every time we pay our energy bills, that money just goes pouring out of our community, that we can do this ourselves and take ownership of it and put that infrastructure in place. This is in Dorchester, where they've got land, local land from a local landowner to set up a community farm. And this is a local comedy club that ran an event, a fundraiser, giving them a big check on the back of a 2CV for some reason. But this kind of thing of land access and getting land back into use is really important. And planning intentionally for this as well, because it's not going to come around by accident. This is something that is, at the moment when the government, when our councils plan for the future, they do so based on the idea that in 10 years' time there'll be more cheap energy, more economic growth than there is today. And these kind of planning processes that are based on more realistic assumptions are really what we need to be happening. And this is the one that we've done down there. And lastly, this is the idea that as well as becoming, of communities becoming their own farmers, their own market gardeners, their own energy providers, maybe we can also look at becoming our own developers. And this is a project that we're working flat out on at the moment to bring an 8-acre site next to the railway station into community ownership and develop it. And there's some fantastic models of this up and down the country of communities doing that for the benefit of the community. So this has been a slightly mad, dashed gabble, and I hope that you haven't, there's been something useful. Yeah, thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions.